everyone, I'm Matt Ford and welcome to the Good Trouble Show. Today we are doing one of our very few live episodes. We rarely do these because, as everyone knows, this is literally a one-man operation. Of course, we have our wonderful mods that are in the chat to help kind of keep the chat room together and keep the riffraff out. And towards the end, we will be taking questions with this very special guest. So anyway, hopefully the wheels don't fall off the train here. It's, what happens when you do things live. But we thought that this would absolutely be the right time to do this. So tonight we are joined by a man who has become one of the central figures in the age of disclosure. Lue Elizondo isn't just a name in the credits. He's the former head of the Pentagon's ATIP program, the guy who walked away from a secure career, kicked the hornet's nest on his way out, and helped force this entire UAP conversation into the sunlight. And of course, Friday, we had the premiere of the amazing, absolutely amazing documentary from Mr. Dan Farah, The Age of Disclosure. Please welcome one of the main subjects in that, Lue Elizondo. Lue, how are you, sir? Oh, let's see. I think your mic might be off. Hold on.
Nope, you're right. That's my issue. Well, thank you very much. I'm still obviously I'm challenged by the technology in this day and age. So it's funny when you said your special guest. I've been called special before, but I think under different understanding of the definition special. So I just proved my case here, right? I couldn't even turn my microphone off of mute. So it's wonderful being here, Matt. Thank you, and thank you to your amazing guests, and thank you for those folks helping in the moderating room in the background. It is certainly my honor and privilege to be with you all here today.
Well, Lue, welcome back to the show. I think this may be like your third or fourth time back on the Good Trouble show. So I'm just super grateful for what you've done on this topic, and of course, coming back. So a lot has happened, the least of which is the release of this bombshell documentary, The Age of Disclosure. And before we get into that, how have you been? I understand you've actually been doing something completely outside of the UAP topic.
Yeah, that's true. I have a small business here in my little hometown in Wyoming. I opened up a little military themed bar. It's kind of like a time capsule, really. It's like walking back into a 1950s officers club. It's been a passion project of mine for many, many years. I wanted to do something really fun and interesting and kind of create a museum experience with really museum quality artifacts. But rather than a museum where you go and everything's behind glass, I wanted it to be a tangible experience so people could come in and grab it and hold it and touch it and feel it and connect with history in a way that maybe normally they wouldn't be able to do, and have a great signature cocktail. But I'm not here to plug that. I appreciate you asking me. But, I just want to make it clear, my purpose for being with you here today is to talk about anything you want. If you want to talk about military bars, we can do that. But I suspect you probably want to talk about something, I think more pressing.
But anyway, congratulations on your new endeavor. I think that is just fantastic. So The Age of Disclosure, film by Dan Farah that was just released Friday. And I have to say, it is absolutely one of the best films I have ever seen in terms of really unpacking this somewhat complex story, the whole UAP issue, and doing it in a digestible way that people that do not track this topic are able to comprehend. But I'm curious, for Lue Elizondo, the man, how has life changed for you since its release? Or has it even changed? Is it kind of more of the same?
I'm not paying attention to social media, so I don't know. A lot of my friends have reached out and very thoughtful remarks, very kind remarks. But I also know that, out in the world of social media, that's not necessarily the case. There's always critics out there. And my intent, really to be part of this project goes back many, many years. And for me, I've always been a disclosure advocate and an advocate for transparency. And so this movie was an attempt by all of us under the leadership of Dan Farah to create a level set, if you will, to be able to create a product that people who aren't, not the other 99% of the population, right? I'm not talking about the hardcore ufologists or folks out there that have been part of this effort now for 10s or even 20 years or even longer. This is really to get the rest of the population up to speed with current information, relevant information, and in some cases, try to get the most senior officials in our government to have an open dialogue with the American people, right? That is ultimately the definition of transparency, and that is exactly what we were trying to go for in this project. And it's been done in secret for over almost 3.5 years. As I said before, it's a bit like it was a bit like birthing an elephant, right? It was certainly not easy. But I think it was necessary. And I think if you're a diehard ufologist, maybe your response would be like, well, I knew that already. Well, that's fine. Maybe you did, but now you've had it confirmed by very, very senior officials in our government. And more importantly, folks, your neighbors, maybe your office mates who, you interact with daily, but never had this conversation. Now you can have a conversation, say, hey, did you see that movie? And, oh, by the way, what'd you think about it? And did you know X, Y, Z, right? And so it provides an impetus for a greater conversation with a collective whole, which is always something I've been trying to tell people. My focus in UAP transparency is not really for the small little echo chamber that exists sometimes on social media. It's really a much broader audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, for the viewers watching this show for the very first time, I'm going to really kind of ask a basic question. Has the government been recovering crashed UAPs, otherwise known as UFOs?
Well, I've already said that for the record, haven't I? About in 2004, 2024, forgive me, I'm showing my age here. In November, I testified before Congress, and I said my piece. I was asked very pointed questions, and even at the risk of losing my security clearance, I had to be very careful what I said. But I said yes, that is in my understanding, based upon the evidence that we had in an official capacity with the U.S. government, that the U.S. government has a longstanding UFO program, and that included crash retrievals.
Do you think that, obviously this has been covered up as has been discussed for a very long time by multiple administrations, multiple presidential administrations, both Democrat and Republican. Are you hearing that the Trump administration may come clean about this?
I'm really careful. If anybody's ever seen me, have this discussion before, I tend to be a bit evasive when it comes to providing inside information into what specific administrations are doing. I don't ever want to overstep my bounds. I certainly don't want to speak on behalf of the president or his administration or senior officials in the administration. I think people realize that I do speak to people on occasion in Washington, D.C. Some of them are seniors. Some of them might be in the legislative branch. Some might be in the executive branch. But nonetheless, I'm still trying to do my part in having this conversation and facilitating. I still consider myself an American patriot, and my allegiance to this country is unwavering. And if there's something I can do to help my government in any capacity, whether it's as an official or as a civilian or as just as a bystander in the peanut gallery, I'm still very loyal to my country, and I want to assist and help any way I can. But at the same time, I'm very careful not to overstep my bounds and speak on behalf of administration officials or speak on behalf of legislative elected officials, because that's not my place to do that. I think if somebody wants to know what the administration is thinking, they should probably ask the administration directly. I'm not a kiss and tell kind of guy. I think most people who know me now realize that, even at my own detriment. There were times early on when I first came out of the shadows and started having this conversation publicly. A lot of people, I could have saved myself a big headache by revealing certain names and certain activities to prove who I was, but I didn't. I never sold out, and I never will sell out. It's something to me that's very important, and even if it's to my own detriment, for me, I think it's important that we give enough flexibility and leeway within the administration, whoever's in charge. It doesn't matter if it's Democrat, Republican, or anything in between. We have to give them enough ability to maneuver the conversation. This is a very tricky conversation. This is a conversation now that is finally happening after at least 80 some years of government cover-ups and secrecy and deniability. And so we're really kind of starting this conversation. I don't want to say we're starting this conversation from scratch. We're not. But for a lot of people, we're starting this conversation over again. But for some people, it's really for the first time. And so we have to have patience, people that are hungry for information. Well, we know all that already. Well, that's fine. But guess what? The neighbor to your left, the neighbor to your right doesn't. Give them an opportunity to catch up. And that's what the purpose of this was, and much more, to provide insight into some of the most senior officials, past and present, in our government, having a conversation on the record about a topic that just 8 years ago, have you asked any official to go on the record or on camera about this topic, they would have laughed you out of the room and called security on you.
Now, I want to lay this out here. I want to dig into really kind of the meat of things, and some things that may be a little bit uncomfortable, but I want to confirm with you that no question is off the table.
No question is off the table, and it's important, Matt, that people know that before any interview, I don't screen, and anybody who's ever interviewed me will tell you the same thing, that I've never predicated a conversation with, I want to know the questions ahead of time. I want to be prepared, or you need to talk about X, Y, Z, or promote ABC. I'm not that guy. You can ask me anything you want, and I'll repeat what I've said before over and over again. I'll always tell you what I know and what I think. And if there's something that I can't discuss because it's too sensitive or it crosses the boundary of classified, I'll let you know that. And
Great.
If it's a question that I simply don't know, I'll tell you that too.
Awesome. Okay, so let's jump in. Now, in the movie, you discussed a plan that was under consideration by 27 people to have both you and David Grush taken out. Folks at home, I was aware of this when this was occurring, and I can tell you, separate of anything that Lue is about to say, that this is accurate. This is not an exaggeration. This is not fiction. This is absolute fact. And I think this goes to illustrate the danger that people like Lue Elizondo, like David Grush, put themselves under when they come forward like this. And anyway, so my question is, who are these people, or under what organization was this action being considered?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, let me preface this by saying this is my opinion. I consider this element very much like a shadow government. They're operating within the confines of their organizations, but their authorities are stemming from somewhere else. Obviously, they are not organizational authorities. They're some sort of legacy authorities. And it may be the reason why, everybody talks about, MJ-12 not being real, or MJ-12 is real, and whatnot. The reason why there's potentially plausible deniability, which is what I think, and let me preface that, is that the reason why they can say there's no MJ-12 is because it's, MJ-27 now, right? Or something to that effect. I'm not saying that is the case, that this MJ-12 has evolved into MJ-27, but I was told specifically that during a conversation of a specific individual on the Hill in a skiff with certain staffers of Congress right there in the skiff at the top secret level, having a very frank conversation that there was serious discussion within this body of 27 people to exercise extreme measures to keep people like me and Dave Grush quiet. I received 3 calls from separate people that were in that meeting. One of them was completely smash drunk. I guess whatever they heard bothered them very much, where they went to the local watering hole right around the corner there in DC and decided to start drinking, and the person gave me a call. Another one called me, and they were, I could hear them sniffling, and I thought they had a bad cold, and it turns out that they were so upset by the conversation, they were crying, and they were saying, I can't believe I just heard this, here. With that said, that doesn't mean a whole lot. We know our government has taken extreme measures in the past to keep people quiet. I'll give you a case in point. When people are like, well, we won't murder anybody. This is during the Obama administration, and I believe it's during his first administration there when he came in. There was an individual who was on the terrorist list. His name was Al Amriki. He was an American. And we, without due process, as an American citizen, you're supposed to have due process, right? And access to a fair trial and whatnot, and all these other things. And that's under the law of peace. But under the law of war, right? Those rules change a little bit. And so without due process, this individual was labeled a terrorist. And by the way, for the record, I'm not saying he wasn't a terrorist. I'm proving a point here, though, that if you are labeled a terrorist, the government can drone you. And they can drone, in some cases, the collateral damage here. I think it killed one of his family members. I think it was his son as well in the drone strike. And he never had a day in court. Right. And so that's just one example. And by the way, I'm going to say here, I'm not defending these terrible human beings if they are terrorists. But what I'm saying is, we deserve a day in court. People deserve a day in court. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're a murderer. It doesn't matter if you are whatever. That is what we do for Americans as American citizens. And so there are times where we don't. And in fact, if you go to Area 51 and you see a sign on top of the fence that says, lethal force authorized beyond this point, they can shoot you dead all in the name of national security without a fair trial, without any type of accusation, without anything, right? So think about that for a moment. You are in a Cessna 172, you have a problem with your engine, and all of a sudden you have to land down on this airfield that turns out it's Groom Lake. They can shoot you. Even though you didn't do anything wrong, just, hey, man, my plane ran out of gas, or my magneto went out and I had to do an emergency landing. Now, I'm not saying they're going to do it, but what I'm saying is that they could if they wanted to, and there wouldn't be any really repercussions because it is a federal installation, and they are authorized to use lethal force to protect that federal installation, and they will. So is it really that much of a surprise that if you have somebody, coming out and blowing the whistle? We've seen other cases in the past with whistleblowers, whether it was like Karen Silkwood, who died under mysterious circumstances, or in this case, the John F. Kennedy assassination, where files, were remaining classified for 60 years after the assassination. These types of wet projects do occur. They do occur. And, everybody cites EO 12333, Executive Order 12333, saying U.S. is not going to engage itself in assassination efforts. But, there's other policies out there that says that we can take extreme measures when we need to. And so, yeah, there you have it.
I can share with you, and I can share with the audience for the first time. I had a conversation with an individual that was part of this classified briefing regarding this issue. And following the briefing, this individual went to the restroom and went into the stall and proceeded to throw up. This individual was so unbelievably upset about this. It blew this individual's. He had no idea this sort of thing was going on, and he went into the restroom and threw up. And I think that's a sad state for us to even be having this conversation, letting alone people like yourself and David Grush, who have served this country with honor and distinction and have put country before self. It's a slap in the face to our democracy and to the Constitution of the United States. Now,
well, it's also very telling, Matt, that there's a secret there that people are willing to do just about anything, to include extreme measures to protect, right? So we have to be very careful, knowing that this is the reality now of the topic. We have to be very careful how we approach this, because there are real stakes at hand here. We have to pay attention to. We have to consider them. And look, I'm sure there's people out there that believe there's a true national security issue by keeping this conversation quiet. And I can't argue that. I can't argue that point, because at the end of the day, even though I may disagree with them, maybe they're right. Maybe they know something I don't. So I'm always very careful not to, throw stones if I don't have to.
Of course.
But you're right. It's very upsetting to me, and it's the reason why I'm constantly. I live in a place where I'm heavily armed. I got a weapon in every room, and I shouldn't have to live like that. But it's my choice to live like that. What is not fair is when it affects your family, right? So,
right.
Like my wife and my children, that's not fair. And the same reason why I told everybody, when they started jumping on Kirkpatrick, the first director of AARO. He and I, it's no secret, there's no real brotherly love between us. But what I will tell you is that, his family was threatened, and that's inexcusable. You don't like somebody, you don't like a guy or a gal, fine, but you don't have the right to turn that anger, or whatever, you're being motivated by, towards innocent people. It's reprehensible, and I think it's a shame. I live in that situation constantly. It's the reason why I live in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming, and I have 5 German shepherds, and it's terrible to have to live your life that way, but it is a reality that I myself and others find themselves in.
Absolutely. I want to talk about your background. Now, you note that later in your career, you started more than 30 years ago, I think, by joining the U.S. Army, and you said, quote, that you were requested into various programs within the military intelligence, managing and directing things like counter-narcotics, counter-terrorism, counter-espionage, counter-insurgency. During this course of this work, this sort of portfolio, were you part of the ground branch of the CIA's Special Activity Center, formerly known as the Special Activities Division? And if so, were any of these missions tasked with the recovery of craft of non-human origin?
Wow. So, boy, that's a heck of a question. I think if you want to know if any work I've done with the Central Intelligence Agency, beyond my W-2s, I would recommend asking the CIA. I am not going to go into any detail here of any type of mission specifics I might or might not have done with either the CIA or the Department of Defense. It's one of those things that I think is if people want to know what I did, of course, I keep all my performance evaluations. They've all been nothing but excellent and outstanding from day one. Never had anything less than that. But it's important that I don't want to discuss anything that maybe I shouldn't. And the reason is because there's a lot of people out there, there's missions out there that if people associate you with, now all of a sudden, let me give you a hypothetical here, right? So people say, oh, you're being evasive again, Lou. So let me give you a real example of how this matters. You have somebody who's been a case officer working for the CIA, let's say over somewhere in the Middle East, and then 5 years later they come out and now their true name is exposed. And all of a sudden now people back in the Middle East who recognize you and you were speaking to another person now realize that other person was actually talking to a CIA operator, right? So now you've just compromised any source that an individual may have been talking to through an official capacity as a source or something to that degree. That entire network is now compromised because now everybody knows that whoever that individual was talking to a CIA representative or an intelligence officer, right? And working in a very specific capacity. And some of these countries, that's considered espionage, punishable by death, right? So now you've compromised. It's not like, hey, coming out, hey, I've done this X, Y, and Z, and you know how cool that is, and you check out all the crap on my wall. You have to be very careful. That's why, like with this, what I have behind me, I'm very careful what's up there. Because I don't want to compromise missions. I don't want to compromise operations, and I certainly don't want to compromise sources and methods. And sometimes just by saying you've been in a particular organization in a particular capacity can do that.
Understood. And again, these are not meant as gotcha questions. These are me just doing my job as
Matt. Listen, I told you you got to ask what you got to ask, and I'll respond the way that I have to respond. Not a problem.
Okay, the next thing, I want to show you a graphic, and I want to get your comment on this. This is how I understand sort of how everything happened in the Obama administration. That basically, James Lakatsky was in the Legacy program. He brought you into the Legacy program, and essentially, both Lakatsky and you sort of lived in an overlap between OSAP and the Legacy program, and that this was essentially sort of a limited hangout during the Obama administration, where in part basically the National Security Council and within factions within the Deep Legacy program were essentially wanted to disclose aspects of the UAP issue to the public up to a certain point. Is that something that you can comment on? Were you part of the Deep Legacy program? Was this a limited hangout?
So I can't speak on behalf of Jim Lakatsky, and I won't. So if you want to know what Jim Lakatsky's how he worked and what capacity, you'd have to ask Jim, especially as regards to the Legacy program. I was brought in specifically initially to look at the counterintelligence and security apparatus of the then OSAP program, which then for me in 2010 really started to focus more on the ATIP side, the nuts and bolts of UAP, and less on the Skinwalker Ranch stuff. Now, I want to preface this. It doesn't mean that that stuff wasn't going on. It was. And the OSAP folks continued doing what they were doing. But we inside the Department of Defense, where I was in the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, began to really focus on these incursions that were occurring into controlled U.S. airspace, and they were of unknown origin, right? And they were performing maneuvers in a way that, frankly, we didn't understand nor could we replicate. And so that was really my focus, more from a national security perspective. I cannot speak as far as what a limited hangout. I don't know what limited hangout means. I hear that term thrown around a lot, so forgive me. But if you can explain to me what that means, and then I can maybe help you with that understanding.
So my understanding of it was that it was in ATIP in certain aspects of it were to essentially, you had factions within the legacy program, factions that felt, we need to let some of this out. And part of one of the elements of ATIP was to sort of peel away some of the layers of the onion. But this was done in coordination with the Obama administration. This was part of something that came out of the National Security Council, and in particular James Clapper. So, can you speak to that? And again, were you ever or are you part of the legacy program?
Well, I worked with Jim Clapper. Actually, I worked for Jim Clapper, as a lot of people know, when he was the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, after he was the director there at DIA, but before he was the Director of National Intelligence. And I can't speak for Jim. He would have to answer that to you. But what I'll tell you, at least when I spoke to him, he was very happy and that we had a UAP program in the department. Now that doesn't mean anything. If you ask him now, he may be think otherwise, but that's certainly up to former Director Clapper to opine about. As far as where this comes from Obama, I never sat with Obama specifically about this topic or this any other topic. My entree point was through the National Security Council for the programs that I was running in the special access world. Unfortunately, I probably wouldn't be able to elaborate too much on how that relationship works. There is an established channel of communication that was between my office and that office. But much beyond that, I wouldn't be able to really provide any fidelity to. We especially not just with classified information, but special access programs. There's a huge sensitivity there. And especially when you're talking about SAPs in some cases, and by the way, I'm not saying this is one of them, if they're unacknowledged, right? That's even more sensitive. So, boy, I don't know how to answer that question. It's a good question. I can't speak on behalf of Jim Clapper or Barack Obama or Jim Lukatsky, and I won't. I can only speak for me, and I can tell you what my observations were. Sitting at the Pentagon and we had another location that I can't really go into detail with, was for me, there was a clear and present danger that we had with these objects that were coming in and had the potential to interfere with our nuclear equities, certainly interested in our nuclear equities. And we were pretty certain that they were also interested in foreign adversarial technology, right? And so what are coming into our test ranges, and how are they coming in unchallenged, and how come we can't detect them till we see them? And then how come they can perform the maneuvers that they're doing? How is that possible? And what are they interested in, right? And capabilities versus intent. That's how we understand if something is a national security threat. It's very simple. You have capabilities versus intent. And we've seen some of the capabilities, but we have no idea the intent. And so, there lies the delta in our information. We call it an information gap or an intelligence gap that we need to start filling. And so that was my motivation.
Understood. Can you speak as to whether there were any other people in the Obama administration besides James Clapper that were supportive of moving forward on this UAP issue?
Yeah, but I don't want to discuss that publicly because
Sure.
individuals, haven't given me permission and also what capacity they were serving, right? Yeah, they were.
Sure.
We had people that were in multiple agencies and other higher ups that were supportive of this. I mean, I've mentioned it specifically that, the White House liaison had been briefed on this topic and was actually helping us try to find some more senior people in the department to lead this effort. This was the whole Neil Tipton issue. So, yes, there were people that were informed and involved, but who those people were until they decided to come forward, I can't say. It's just like with Jim Lukatsky, right? For years, everybody was throwing arrows at me, and Jim made a decision to become public and finally, explain, his part of OSAP. But I never threw anybody in the bus or provided any names of somebody who could, vouch or verify or validate what I'm saying until they were ready. And I am still that way now. I don't throw people under the bus just to save my own skin. If there's one thing people know about me, that's very sacred to me.
One of the things that James Clapper said, he said, quote, "I don't know why we haven't been more transparent about this in the past. I'm part of that crime, I guess. I didn't insist on more transparency with respect to this issue." Do you think that there are folks in Clapper's position and elsewhere that, sort of looking back on their involvement in this issue, perhaps wish they had done things different and not sort of maybe not necessarily directly played a part, but maybe how they may have handled things could have put us in a different position in terms of where we're at right now?
Of course. I mean, hindsight's always 20/20. The things that I could have done better and should have done better, right? I'm the first one to criticize myself. There's things that I could have done looking back, which is a luxury that many of us don't really have until it's too late. There's things that I certainly could have done better and should have done differently. All we can do is learn from those lessons, those mistakes, and move forward. There are people, yes, I know people for sure that have, very senior people who said, "Man, I wish I would have been a little bit more open with this topic, or maybe a little more proactive." But I don't hold it against them, because every single day I look at myself in the mirror and say there are things I could have done better, or I could have done perhaps more effectively. So yeah, sure. If there's a blame game out there, I would say, look, it starts with me. That holding yourself accountable. Look, I've always told everybody, Matt, I'm not perfect. I make mistakes all the time, and all I can do is hold myself accountable. I'm the very first person if I make a mistake within 24 hours, I try to remedy that mistake. Unlike a lot of other people out there that like to throw barbs and throw monkey poo at you. When they're wrong, they'll never apologize. They'll never publicly say, "Oh, I was wrong," or "I apologize." Right there, they'll just go on to the next thing, and they're okay tarnishing your name. I'm the first one to come out, always say every time, if I've made a mistake, I've made a mistake. Here's how I made the mistake, and here's how it won't happen again. And hopefully that same mistake doesn't happen again. And if it does, hold myself accountable to that again, right? That's all we can do. But pretending that we don't make mistakes, that for me is more worrisome, because everybody makes mistakes. Everybody, especially when you're fighting the dragon every single day, you have to beat that dragon every single day or it eats you. It only has to eat you once and you're gone. Right. So we have to do a better job of holding ourselves accountable. And that's something that I strive to do every single day. So I'm not going to throw mud on anybody else. Yes, I'm sure there are people out there that wish they would have done things differently, but hey, I'm I'm the leader of that club. I'm not just the owner. I'm a client, right?
Understood. Kind of a bit of a deviation here. What is your opinion on we all talk pretty freely about, obviously there are things in the air that appear to be of non-human origin. The question, of course, then becomes, okay, what is inside of these craft? What is operating them? Who is operating them? That I think has been pretty much a pretty common conversation, especially in terms of this film and whatnot. One area that was not touched upon in the film, and I, to be honest, haven't even really touched upon it on the Good Trouble Show, is the issue of abductions by non-human intelligence. In your personal opinion, do you believe that aspect of the phenomena is real? And my second question to you is, if you do think it's real, do you think that the American government has been well aware of this, and that could possibly be one of the key reasons for keeping this thing, under wraps?
Well, let's look at this from the perspective. Let's take NHI, non-human intelligence, out of the equation for just a second to help drive home a point. If there was a country out there that was secretly crossing U.S. borders and kidnapping American citizens and then taking them somewhere to an undisclosed location and interrogating them and then bringing them back, the term abduction for me as a former special agent, that's a felony. That's a crime, right? So the question is, first of all, we have to have our lexicon correct. When we say abductions, is that the same thing as interactions? People say, "Oh, I've been abducted." Okay, well, if you've been abducted, truly, but taken away against your free will to a place that you did not agree to, that's kidnapping, right? And then if they touch you for any reason, well, that's assault. So we can start racking up the crimes here, the federal crimes. I'm very careful to when we say abduction phenomenon, we have to be more precise. Just like the term UAP, we used to say UFOs, and now we realize that wasn't accurate enough. Do we need to have that discussion about this idea of abductions? Because look, if I will tell you, if there is an enemy out there, a foreign adversary that's kidnapping Americans and doing these things, and our government knows about it and can do nothing about it, that's a very significant problem, right? That's not even a UFO problem. That's just a real, no kidding problem we have from a national security perspective, and we wouldn't tolerate it. It'd be considered an act of war. And that's problematic for me. Now, some people say, well, I was abducted and I was out in the middle of the forest and this thing came down and I lost some track of time and I woke up, and well, that's not necessarily the same thing as an abduction. That may just be an encounter, right? And again, I'm not minimizing that, but we have to separate. We have to be consistent in our terminology, because I think a lot of people are confused when they hear the abduction phenomenon. And maybe it's not so much abduction. And if somebody was abducted, then that's a very significant problem, because they're being taken away against their own free will. I don't know how to answer that question properly, because I think we still need to have more dialogue about that. When Americans are kidnapped and held hostage, look at, what happened in Iran, right, in 1979. It almost caused a war between the United States and Iran until they released those hostages. If somebody's truly being abducted, then I don't consider this any different. I think that it is incumbent upon the U.S. government then to address this. If there are U.S. citizens whose lives are being endangered, and then from a bigger optic, for the sake of humanity, if this is happening to anybody, right, that's a problem. But we all know too well that if it doesn't involve me, I don't really care, right? That's how people tend to be, and that's
That's true, yeah.
Going on right now all over the world with people, whether you're in Africa or anywhere else in the world, where human beings, for simple religious reasons, are being persecuted, right? There's now a discussion that Christians are being kidnapped in certain parts of Africa and being killed. But here in the United States, not very many people pay attention to it because it doesn't involve them, right? As long as it doesn't involve their local weekly trip to Walmart, or their, watching Monday Night Football. That's way over there. That's not a reality that I have to deal with. And so they don't. I tend to look at it a little bit differently. I think we should be involved in any time humanity writ large, anybody, any human, is being persecuted. I think I think that's problematic. I know there's a lot of people that will look back and say, oh, well, you did this in your job and you did that in your job. Look, there's a lot of people who think a lot of things, but they don't know anything. And they'd be like, well,
of course,
Lue did this, Lue did that. You sure about that? You sure about that? You sure about that? Because you heard that? Because hearsay? Is that why? And then you're going to go ahead and you're going to tarnish somebody's reputation and attack them and smear them for something you have no idea about. You were not there. You never will be there. And you have absolutely no understanding or idea what you're talking about. And so this is why I'm very, very careful. I know we're going back to the abduction discussion here. I think that we as a society need to do a better job of understanding what what does that mean? What does abduction mean? What does it mean? Are we talking forced abduction? Are we talking an encounter? Are we talking interaction? Right. So again, I know I'm kind of beating around the bush on this because I don't have a clear answer for you. I don't
Got it.
know
Yeah.
how to solve it. All I can do is give you examples in the real world where we're facing those decisions now, and no one's doing anything about it. You might see an article or two, but the United Nations, whose job is to help enforce, this sense of humanity around the world. Where are they? Why aren't they down in Africa right now protecting people? And it doesn't matter if you're Christian or Muslim, persecution is persecution, right? Why aren't you down there doing something? And if it turns out that this topic, UAPs, involves something similar, then guess what? We've got a big problem on our hands.
I totally agree. And folks, we're going to get to a few audience questions here. And I just want to say about half of you watching the show right now are not subscribers. So if you are not a subscriber to the show, we would certainly appreciate it if you'd hit the subscribe button, leave a comment, that sort of thing. Also, super chats are open. Putting on shows like this, they are not for free, and we strictly rely on viewers at home. We do not have sponsors for this show, so we welcome any sort of generosity in that way. I want to
real quick, Matt, for the record, just so the audience knows, so you're not paying me. So when you say not free,
exactly.
Production cost, but I want to make this clear. I never charge for my interviews. When I do these things, I do them, out of my own time. I'm actually, as soon as we're done here, after your questions, I got to run to the bar and I got to, I got to sling cocktails until we close. So, I have a real job. I'm not grifting. I'm not asking anybody to give me money or donate money. But it does cost production for you, and you're doing this, as you said, solo. So I completely endorse anybody who wants to subscribe to your channel. I think that's a good idea. I like the material you put out. I certainly would endorse that.
Thank you very much. And hey, I wouldn't have the money to pay you anyway. So but anyway, I appreciate that.
So it doesn't matter, right?
Right. I want to jump back to Clapper again. I think that in the movie there was one particular thing that many people missed that he had to say that was of really what I consider great importance. I think you know what I'm talking about.
I think so. You want me to say what I think it is and then correct me?
Yeah, we'll see if we're on the same page.
There's a moment where Clapper did some reflection, and you could see he was being very careful with his choice of words, but he said that back in the Air Force, when he was, back in A2, Air Force Intelligence, that they had a database. And they were collecting, obviously, to have a database, you have to collect information to feed that database of vehicles of unknown origin, right? Of, in essence, unidentified anomalous phenomenon, right? And that was kind of a holy cow moment. I'm surprised you're the only one who picked that up. If this is what you're referring to, if I'm mistaken,
yes.
Right. So I think that's a big moment. I think, I'm surprised more people didn't pick up on that. I would think that'd be on headlines, right? Former director of national intelligence, former director of DIA, and former undersecretary of defense for intelligence admits that the Air Force had databases back in the 60s and 70s. What?
Yeah.
Mind blown. You just got that on camera after all these years of denial. No, Blue Book. Nah, nothing to see here, folks. Oh, well, actually, we were seeing it and we were collecting on it. We're trying to understand it.
Yeah. Okay, let's get to a few audience questions here. So this is from Neandrew42. Was Dan Farah discussing Interloper or another effort to lure UFOs with nuclear presence on Joe Rogan when he said the effort was successful? I'm not sure what that means. You'd
have to talk to Dan Farah about that. I'm not going to answer for Mr. Farah on his interview with Joe Rogan. I thought it was a great interview, by the way.
Yes.
But I'm not going to speak on behalf of what Dan may or may not have been inferring to. Great question. I would ask him directly that.
Absolutely, yeah. I've invited him on the show. We'll see. I think he's got bigger fish to fry on bigger news outlets than the Good Trouble Show. But he knows he is certainly
Matt,
welcome.
Don't say that. There's no such thing as bigger fish to fry. There's no such. Right. Guys, we're all the same size. It's important. You do a tremendous job with your audience. I'm very grateful for this is the first live interview other than on one major network that I've done since the release of this film. I could be on any outlet
Absolutely.
I want to be. I want to do this one. And so you are very important. Your audience is very important. Your audience is playing a huge role in this. Your audience has the capability to mobilize and do things. Look, we had laws in Congress being pushed because the people demanded it, right? And those people are part of your audience. So, my hat's off to each and every one of you, and my, bigger fish to fry. I can't think of a better outlet than yours to do this.
I very much appreciate that comment. Thank you for making my Sunday. I appreciate that. Okay, so let's see here. This is from Brad 80s Music. Is the theory that some NHI are synthetic due to the harmful energy experienced inside the craft? Is that a debate in the program?
Well, it's not even any type of exposure inside the craft due to potential technology inside the craft. Look, if these things are coming from, just hypothetically, and we don't still know origin yet, but let's not have that conversation about origin, but let's just hypothetically, these things are going to outer space. The ISS space station, one of the reasons why our astronauts can only stay so long in space is because the harmful effects of cosmic rays and gamma radiation. The Earth's Van Allen belts really, and our atmosphere protects us here in this little ball we call Earth. But once you go outside that, the radiation can be lethal and will be over time. And so you can imagine if you're in space, for a long time, you are being exposed to a lot of harmful cosmic radiation. Now, as far as synthetics, I don't know. I don't know what that means. Are we talking synthetics like silicone? Are we talking synthetics like genetic engineering? Are we talking about a cyborg situation where you have a hybridization of technology versus organic material? So you have this, thing that's kind of a cross between two. I don't know. We need bigger minds to, I guess, contemplate that and study that. My focus was really nuts and bolts,
Right.
more than anything else. It's a great question, but one that I'm not qualified to answer.
Okay, and we've only got about 10 minutes left with you, so if you would, we'll just keep your answers as brief as you could, please.
Okay.
I very much appreciate it.
Rapid fire. Gotcha.
That's right, rapid fire. Here we go. Do you think the U.S. government, this is from Nick McConnell, not Mitch McConnell or Kirk McConnell. Kirk was on our show recently. Does Lue think
by
that
the way, a great human being, by the way, Kirk.
Absolutely.
He is this country that, if ever get out, people would throw him a ticker tape parade.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Does Lue think that the U.S. government military has had discussions with alien races, given what Eric Davis revealed about the Holloman Air Force Base UFO landings?
I wasn't alive for that. If that event indeed took place, I have no direct knowledge because I wasn't even alive then, and so I'm very careful not to discuss something that I wasn't privy to directly. Yes, have I heard about that? Yes. Is it possible? Sure, anything's possible, but I that's out of my wheelhouse. I am not qualified in any regard. If I told you right now what I thought, it'd be a 50-50 shot of it being true or not.
Understood. Okay, let's see here. Thanks, folks, for the super chats. Really appreciate that. A question for Lue. This is from a John B. I can't say last part. What happens if another country takes the lead in disclosure? For instance, in the documentary, it was discussed that China and Russia have a significant UAP reverse engineering crash recovery and reverse engineering program. What would be the damage to the reputation of the United States if, say, Xi Jinping went public and said, this is what we've had, this is what we've always had, and oh, by the way, the American government has been lying to the world, not only its own people, for over 80 years. What kind of damage would that do?
Well, let's pull that thread for a second. Okay, so Xi Jinping says, yeah, we've been doing it, we've got this technology since, let's say, the 1950s. Then the question is, okay, China, what have you learned from that? And by the way, were you the ones flying this? Did you reverse engineer it? And are you the ones now flying this technology over our controlled U.S. airspace in violation of treaty agreements, in violation of Geneva Conventions, in violation of international law, right? This gets really sticky really quick because it's a very slippery slope to go from, yes, this is real, to the next question is, there's no way to avoid it. Once a country says, yes, these are real, the very next question is, what have you learned from it? And now all of a sudden you got to go into this very, very sensitive conversation in this two-step where you're having to hem and haw and kind of do these weird matrix maneuvers. publicly, because you don't want to reveal, to the world if there's any potential blue friendly capability that we've been able to reverse engineer based upon insight. It's not a great place to be in, right? And then it says, really? Okay, well, how long have we had it and who paid for it? Oh, well, yeah, guess what about that too? We've been kind of taking money that was supposed to go here and placing it over here, and we didn't really
Right.
tell right? So you can imagine from an American perspective how tough that conversation is. Now,
Right.
I can't speak on behalf of China, the People's Republic of China. I have no idea internally how they make their decisions geopolitically, and I'm certainly not going to assume how they do it. But you can see there's always risk. There's always risk,
Of
and it's
course.
going to put people in a very uncomfortable situation that they prefer, not to talk about for obvious
Okay.
reasons.
Understood. Thank you. Okay, from Antifa, I'm sorry, let's see. Question, Rama Mawai. Okay. Thank you for the super chat donation, of course. Question, thank you for your service, Lou. Do you still remote view, and what is your opinion on the telepathy tapes?
Wow. So let me start by saying I'm aware of the telepathy tapes. I have not, I have not really explored them too much. I've been a bit busy with some of my other endeavors.
Sure.
I know already the reality of remote viewing, and it works. And from a scientific perspective, this is not, weird mumbo jumbo voodoo science. It's probably this quote unquote sixth sense. If you talk to any cop, they'll tell you, they have a lot of cops that are seasoned, been on the road for a while. They have this weird spidey sense, right? When they know something's going to go down. That quote unquote intuition. It's that intuition is probably tied to more consistent with things like remote viewing. I think remote viewing is absolutely natural. I think a lot of us do it. In fact, a lot of times when you are about to make a call to a loved one and they might be on a trip somewhere and they say, "Oh my God, I was just on the phone to call you," or "I was just thinking of you." That itself may be an expression, believe it or not, of remote viewing that every common day people experience all the time, every day. So to ask me if I still remote view, I mean, I'm not being paid to do it, if that makes sense. I don't do it professionally. I'm not doing it as a business. I'm not a tarot card reader or a psychic that puts up a sign in front of the door and does psychic readings. Will I do it in a situation where I think is necessary to protect people and lives? Absolutely. But there are people out there that are far more qualified to talk about remote viewing than me. Hal Pudol, for example, is probably one of the best people, maybe even Kit Green to some degree. And then there's some other folks as well. After Ingo Swann had passed away, there's people like Joe McMoneagle right now, who does a fantastic job. He has a workshop. I'm not endorsing the workshop, by the way, for the record, but if you're interested in it, there are people out there that were part of the Legacy Stargate program, very good remote viewers, that you could reach out, and Mr. McMoneagle is just one example. The person that recruited me into a certain program early on in my Army career was a gentleman named Eugene Lessman. And he was considered at one time probably the very best remote viewer in the United States Army, under INSCOM, Intelligence and Security Command. I'm beating around the bush for a reason, because some of this
Sure.
gets into my private life, and I don't usually share what I do or don't do privately, at least
I
not in the public.
respect that. Absolutely. Okay, let's see here. Now, this is a question that is coming from Nell McKenchie. It's hard for me to read my screen half the time. I'm blind as a bat. I can't see a whole hell of a lot. You've spoken at length for quite some time, and you even refer to this in the movie about legal amnesty for the people that have been part of the legacy program and elsewhere in perhaps the intelligence community, DOE, et cetera. These folks did some things that we could possibly cross the line into what would be considered a felony. Do you feel, for instance, when we were talking earlier about the 27 people that were part of the decision makers, I'm assuming they likely were they were likely gatekeepers in the legacy program. do you feel that there's a group of folks that perhaps engaged in wet works, hot bumps, things like that, that should be exempt from that legal amnesty?
Well, look, at the end of the day, we need to decide how important is truth. Do you want truth or do you want retribution, right? Or do you want justice? And they sometimes can be all mutually exclusive. They don't have to be the same thing. I personally think, I look at it more from a practical perspective. If I've got a rabid raccoon in my living room and it's backed up against the corner and it's feeling threatened, going in there screaming and hollering is probably not the best solution. What it's probably going to do is continue to act in a very unpredictable, violent way. Now, if you can tone down the energy and maybe offer it some bait or some food to coax it out of the corner gently, softly, and maybe it can scoot out the door that way, I think that's always preferable. Am I going to get mad that there's a raccoon in my corner screaming and hollering and tearing up the furniture? Well, I don't like it. But what's more important than me getting out my frustration of it tearing up the couch is really getting it out of the house, taking care of the problem. And so how do you do that? And sometimes you have to incentivize things and people and in order to accomplish the mission you want. We've done it before. Look at the Truth and Reconciliation that occurred in Rwanda. That's a beautiful country now. And it tore itself literally I lived through those years of watching the bodies flowing down the river, right? I mean, whoever thought that hellscape would ever be what it is today? Sometimes you have to have truth and reconciliation. Sometimes, not all the time. Now, there are times like you have with the Nazis and the Nuremberg trials where you say, hey, buddy, genocide's genocide, and you're going to hang from the gallows because of it. And I'm not opposed to that as well. I think if people have done truly evil things, they need to be held accountable. But at the same time, in order to hold people accountable, you first have to know the truth. And how are you going to get to the truth unless you incentivize the truth to be told? So it's a great question. But it's a little more complicated than simply saying, give everybody amnesty and don't give, or give nobody amnesty. I think there's a middle ground. I think there's a threshold. And I think for most people would probably qualify for amnesty unless somebody's done something truly heinous. And then at that point, maybe it's a different, but look, we give murderers in mob cases amnesty all the time. So they would go ahead and tell on their buddies, right? In order to testify against the key witness, or the key, in this case, the key perpetrator. We have given people amnesty before in the past, people that probably didn't deserve it, but we did it because we had quote unquote bigger fish to fry. So it's not that uncommon.
Okay, final question. No, you got to get out of here. Get to your day job now.
I'm a Gemini, like long walks on the beach and pina coladas. Done.
I'm a Gemini as well. That explains why we get along so well. Okay, here we go. So if we knew what the government knew, again, this is our final question. Thank you for being with us for the hour. If we knew what the government knew about NHI, would that reveal more about the fundamental nature of reality? Yeah. Would it reveal anything about the fundamental nature of reality?
Yes, of course it would. It's every time we have a new discovery in our oceans, it opens our understanding of what is possible, right? And what is not. We, for many, many years, we thought the ocean was the realm of sea monsters. Right. And we laugh about that. But the reality, as I said before, there are sea monsters. They're just called great white sharks and blue whales and the great squid of the Pacific. And they're actually part of nature. They're not really monsters. Once you understand them, then it's not a mystery. It's not a monster anymore. Now it's just part of your new reality, your new paradigm, your new existence. Right. What happens if later this week, NASA says, hey, guess what? We found microbial life on Mars. It's real. Life is there. Life was there. Life existed there. Right. Would that shock and awe America? I don't think so. I think most people would be like, yeah, we kind of expected it, right? It might, to some people, being a little surprising, but I don't think it will change our understanding of who we are necessarily. What it will do is give us an extra appreciation, though, of our place in the universe, right? And I think that's ultimately what it will do. It will help shape a new paradigm of reality for us. Just because we don't acknowledge something doesn't mean it's not real, right?
Right.
This happens all the time in being part of the human condition, where you always think something's not possible. Look, my background was biology and medicine when I went to college, and I was told early on that there was only, all life derived from photosynthesis, and we realized that's not true. There's life forms that survive off of chemosynthesis, a process deep under the ocean where there's lights can't travel. And then we were told, well, all life requires oxygen. Well, that's silly, because that's not true. There are anaerobic bacteria such as Clostridium botulinum, aka botulism, right? That will die in the presence. In fact, we give oxygen therapy sometimes for people so they heal quicker, and hopefully some of those anaerobic bacteria don't take over in superoxygenated environments, and that's how we kill them. So we're always kind of relearning our understanding of life and reality and our existence. And if there's one thing that we get right as a species, is that the fact is that we're usually wrong at first. That's the one thing we actually get right every time.
Yeah, I can empathize with that. That's for sure. That's certainly how I feel. Well, Lue, thank you so much for joining us on the show. Congratulations on this movie. As soon as I walked out of the movie theater, I texted you and just said you should be so incredibly proud of what you did, what you said, and moreover what you have done for this country, the sacrifice that you have made, you continue to make, and I will say the really I would say obscene attacks by these folks online. There's just no excuse for it. I don't know if they have some kind of neurosis or in my opinion, more likely on the payroll of some folks at the Legacy program. But what you and your family have had to endure, my hat is truly off for you. I feel for you, and I think everyone watching should really stop and think about the sacrifices that people like yourself, David Grush, and others have made, really to doing something that was really kind of no positive anything in it for you other than doing the right thing for the country. So, Lue, thank you very much for that.
Well, I appreciate that, but before I let you go, Matt, and forgive me, but this is very important. Thank you for saying that I should be proud, but the reality is I don't have time to be proud. I'm too busy working this topic to ever look back and say, oh, this is what I've accomplished. Two, my sacrifices, there are people who have sacrificed much more than me, and I've had to pay the price for it. So I'm not a hero in any respect. I know that because I've actually served with heroes before. And last but not least, the real people that I take my hat off to are the silent voices, those who've been silenced for trying to have this conversation in the past, but were actively suppressed and may have lost their career or much worse, right? That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I am no hero. I'm just a regular dude like everybody else, and I've got my weaknesses and my bias, and I'm normal, just a human being, trying to finish the job that I was given in the first place. A job, by the way, that I did not ask for, did not volunteer for, but a job nonetheless that I feel is very, very important and still relevant to U.S. national security. And so that's why I do what I do. I appreciate the accolades, but the reality is I am not deserving of those accolades. There are many people out there that are far more deserving than I am.
Well said. Well said. Lue, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing what your contribution is next to this UAP disclosure thing that's going on. I can't thank you enough for being on the show.
Always my honor. Always my honor and privilege. And if anybody's ever out in Wyoming, swing by and have a beer with me. I'm finally learning how to pour a good beer, with and this is the right amount of foam. And people get very picky about their draft beer, so I've learned to be a bit particular now when I'm pouring people's beer for them.
Oh, I perfected that back in college in the fraternity. So if you need a bartender, someone to pour your beer, I pour pretty good beer. So I would gladly give you some lessons, or which I don't think you need.
Oh no! When I first opened the bar, it was a bit like a dinner and a show. It was a disaster for me. But I'm finally learning.
Awesome. Okay. Well, Lue, thank you very much for joining us, and look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you, sir.
Always my honor and privilege, and a big shout out to your amazing audience and your folks behind the scenes producing this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Okay, all right, that was Lue Elizondo, ladies and gentlemen. Just going to turn the audience audio off there. I think I may have had a little setting off a little bit. He may have been a little bit echoey. This is why, in general, I do not do live shows, because there's no one in the studio doing this but me, and trying to kind of do it all and not screw something up is always a bit challenging. I want to thank everyone for the super chats, and I really want to especially thank Lue Elizondo for coming on the show and facing some very pointed, tough questions. I want to speak a moment about this film, and I want to speak to what is going on in social media, and I'm not speaking about just X, but there is a machine. I remember I was in Washington, D.C. at a particular function, and I was speaking to someone who works in the national security field, and this individual said, if you think about it, this UAP issue, what we're trying to accomplish right now is really upending a financial, a power structure that has been in place really sort of since the post-World War II. There was another conversation that I had with someone, we'll just say this person's wealth was in excess of multi-millions of dollars, said to me, Matt, you have no idea the potential market cap of this technology. This person said, we're not talking billions, we are talking trillions. There is a lot of money at stake. There's a lot of money at stake in harvesting this technology, deploying it. There is a lot of money at stake in maintaining the status quo and maintaining this sort of unlimited fire hose of money that is being given to companies such as Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, aerospace corporations, all of these different folks that are allegedly part of the UAP crash retrieval program. These folks, and let me put it this way, as I mentioned with the Legacy program, in the Legacy program there are factions that have decided that it's time to pull the Band-Aid off, roll out certain things, not all, certainly nothing that would jeopardize national security. And then you have factions within the Legacy program, within the IC, who want to keep the status quo, keep things as they are, as they've been for 80 plus years. You have this competition between these different factions, these different sort of fiefdoms. My point here is that when you go online and you see there's a difference between skeptics that are simply asking questions about things or they're open-minded, but when you see accounts, in particular skeptics that have nonprofit organizations or skeptics that have, let's say, a website that is a sort of nexus for debunking. When you go and you look at those accounts and you look at the sheer volume of messaging during the past, 3 days, when you look at the amount of replies that they have on this topic for 3 days, when you see these folks, some of them with extremely large followings, post things on, when is Jay Stratton going to roll out the alien bodies, and that'll be proof. Or a common fallback sort of straw man argument is extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. They're playing games with you. They're knowingly playing games with you. They know exactly what they are doing. These are not stupid people. These people know how to counter message on this. Now, I've said on the show many times that in my opinion, and I think at some point this will be proven as fact, that many of these individuals are on the payroll of either internet activities, operations from the Deep Legacy program, or internet activity operations off of the Department of Defense, quite likely out of the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security. These folks that are showing up in tweets, let's say some of you that maybe have larger accounts go on Twitter today and say, this movie is a must-see. Everybody must go see this, come up with their own opinion, and then you'll see responses in your thread by these quote-unquote skeptics who are saying, well, where's the evidence? These are all repeated things. And then when you go and you look at their account, you may see an account where the header on X says UAP advocate, transparency advocate, or things like that. When you go and you look at that account and then you search through their posts, and in the life of their account, they've not once tweeted until recently about the UAP issue, that tells you that these are sleeper accounts. These are accounts that are being given, hey, it's time to wake up and do your job of counter messaging on the UAP issue. What these people want to do, what these debunkers, professional debunkers want to do, is they want all of you at home to not discuss this. They want all of you at home to not see this movie by Dan Farah. They want all of you at home not to recommend to your friends and family to watch this. Their job, and this is a job, this kind of internet warfare, people get paid to do this. This is a career. Their job is to do everything in their power to derail this film because they know this film is impactful. They know that this film has government officials saying way more than they have ever said. If you walk out of that film thinking that there's nothing to this, well, then you need to go see the film again. In my opinion, this film, and I know a lot of you that track this topic will have watched this film and said, okay, well, there's a lot here that I already knew about. I certainly did. It was maybe the Tic Tac thing I didn't know about. But there is no better film, in my opinion, in the history of this topic that has done such a stellar job of telling this story. Telling this story not to all of us that track this topic, but all of the people that do not track this topic, which, let's face it, is probably about 99% of the U.S. population. They do not want this thing to take off. I mentioned several shows back that, in my opinion, there was a communications plan, a comms plan launched around the very beginning of the year. And in my opinion, part of that was the Wall Street Journal article that was being cooked up in the beginning of January by Wall Street Journal journalist Joel Schechtman and Aruna Viswanathan. This article that they were working on at the very beginning of the year, they were reaching out to many of the people in this film. And those people, they smelled a rat. They knew that this particular journalist had an agenda, and that this was going to be an article of pure disinformation out of the Wall Street Journal. This started in January. Now you jump forward a little bit. Around that time, you begin to see counter messaging by the former director of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. Much of what he was saying was in concert with things that he had said before, where he literally threw members of Congress under the bus, in particular Representative Anna Paulina Luna, who I may not politically agree with, or Tim Burchett, but I fully support everything they are doing on this UAP issue. And I will go to the mat for them anytime. Anytime. So you've got Sean Kirkpatrick around later in the spring throwing cold water on this. Then you have the former deputy director of the Pentagon AARO office, another career intelligence official. I underline, emphasize the word intelligence. The same as Sean Kirkpatrick. Intelligence official who is going on podcasts and mimicking, repeating the same phraseology that this journalist from the New York Post, he's not a journalist, journalist Stephen Greenstreet is saying. So you've got Stephen Greenstreet, who's out there running interference by posting all of this stuff, who I would remind you worked for the former formerly worked for Susan Goff, who is the nexus of all of the communications that happen in the Pentagon Public Affairs Office. Doesn't matter what branch of government, it all goes through Susan Goff. You've got Stephen Greenstreet, who used to produce basically propaganda for Susan Goff in his previous iteration. Now he's really doing the same thing. So you've got the two former heads of the Pentagon AARO office saying almost verbatim what this guy, who is clearly, in my opinion, on the payroll, he's doing a job. These folks are doing the exact same thing, saying the exact same things that Stephen Greenstreet is saying. The same messaging. Then, on top of that, Susan Goff in the Pentagon is repeating those same things. Those same things. When you look at Tim Phillips, again, a career intelligence official, going on the air and saying, oh, we have vehicles that look like, things from Star Trek, I forgot the exact phrase that he used, but as large as, I'm not a Star Trek guy, but as large as a Klingon battleship. So here you have a guy who knows damn well not to make unauthorized disclosures or a security violation, going on a podcast outing vehicles that we apparently have that are the size of a Klingon battle cruiser. You're telling me that this guy that knows damn well that if he violates his ICNDAs, that he's going to end up in Leavenworth. You're telling me that he's going rogue? You're telling me that he's just, going off on his own and just saying whatever he wants? Bullshit. Sean Kirkpatrick and Tim Phillips know exactly what they're doing. They are doing their job. They are doing exactly what the folks up the chain have told them to do. They're not giving out their personal opinion. I virtually guarantee you that. That is what these folks do. Go back and look at from one of the former science folks, Dr. Travis Taylor, and look at some of his responses to Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. I can tell you, because I've been told, that Sean Kirkpatrick was read in to most of the UAP crash retrieval program. When he tells you he's not being straight. But the point is that you first have the Wall Street Journal article being cooked up in the beginning of January. Then, months later, you have Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, who is working for the United States government at the Department of Energy, going public and disparaging members of Congress, personally disparaging them, throwing the body under the congressional body under the bus, so to speak. You then have the follow-up of the good cop. You've got Sean the bad cop. Now let's roll out the friendly good cop, Tim Phillips, to execute on a mission, to say a few things. And what are those few things? This is the communication strategy that has been in place. Number one, message that AARO is doing a good job. Message that AARO is properly funded. Message that due to the job, the quote-unquote good job that AARO is doing, that Congress does not need to spend additional funds on investigations, on hearings, because AARO's got it. The Pentagon's got it. Pentagon's doing a great job. They've got all the budget they need. They're deploying these sensor systems. They don't need any additional help. The other point is to, again, derail the hearings, any potential hearings, discourage whistleblowers from coming forward. Then this article comes out. This article from the Wall Street Journal on Aruna Viswanathan and Joel Schechtman. When you read this thing, there was no better textbook case of disinformation being put out by a mainstream news outlet. There is no better example of disinformation being put out by a mainstream news organization at the direction of the government. Full stop. There simply is not. I had Robert Salas, Captain Robert Salas, former nuclear launch control officer, who was a subject of that book. I'm sorry, not the book, of the article. He told me on this show that when Joel Schechtman reached out to him to say, "Oh, we know what happened to you at your nuclear event where these UAP allegedly shut down these missiles," Robert gave him all of the reasons, Bob gave him all of the reasons why that was false. Was there any kind of correction that was issued by Joel Schechtman and the Wall Street Journal? No. Captain Bob Salas told me exactly that he felt that the article had been pre-written by Joel Schechtman prior to him interviewing him. He thought that the whole cake had been baked prior to him even interviewing Bob Salas. And I guarantee you that is probably exactly what happened. Now, what else is this comms plan from the Pentagon, the Legacy Program, and the IC all about? It was about derailing the UAP Disclosure Act. We've spoken about the UAP Disclosure Act extensively on this show. It is spoken about on this movie with Dan Farah. This, again, the message that the Pentagon was sending through this Wall Street Journal article is that any legislation, any investigations are a waste of taxpayer money. There is no greater fear than a politician has than of his or her constituency. So what do? You put out an article in perhaps one of the nation's largest publications that the subtext is Congress doesn't need to be spending your hard-earned tax money on this. So when you have this UAP Disclosure Act, which, by the way, would have cost virtually nothing, they don't want that act to go through. They do not want, in particular, the eminent domain clause to go through. That is part of the messaging. The other part of this comms plan, one of the goals, is to derail this FBI task force that has been looking into this issue. The Pentagon, the Legacy Program, the Central Intelligence Agency, they do not want Congress asking questions. They do not want Congress holding hearings. They do not want anything to occur out of the legislative branch that would not be under the direct communications control, the direct purview of the Pentagon Public Affairs Office. They need to control that narrative. They need to maintain control of this so that they can decide what reality is told to you at home. There's an executive order, I think it's EO 12333 or something like that. It's spoken about in the movie that prohibits the U.S. government from executing on operations related to disinformation to the public. The legacy program has ignored that for a long time, but during the Obama administration, the passage of what's called the Smith Modernization Act created a legal loophole for the Pentagon, Susan Goff, and all these folks to put out disinformation targeting the American public. It's a kind of legal cutout for them to get around this issue, a loophole. And this is the sort of thing that they're doing. So again, you have this comms plan to derail the UAP Disclosure Act, to put pressure on members of Congress not to investigate this and to not spend taxpayer money on it. And then really, the most disgusting, un-American, obscene goal of this comms plan, which we have seen this time and time again, and we see this with journalists such as Stephen Greenstreet and others, and some of these others like Michael Shermer and others that do it in a much more subtle way. The goal is to make you doubt the credibility of the whistleblowers that have come forward. If they can be successful in making all of you at home say to yourself, well, you know, David Grush has suffered from PTSD, so maybe he's a little wacky and we can't trust what he says, or whatever about Lue Elizondo, or all of these different things where people like Greenstreet of the New York Post, and I would encourage all of you to call the New York Post, call their human resources department, and let them know what has been occurring. When you have individuals like that purposely are defaming these whistleblowers, these men and women who have worn the uniform, these men and women that have worked in the legacy programs, either to any particular capacity, scientists, intelligence, whatnot, because there are good people in these programs that are trying to do the right thing. There are good people in the CIA, in the DOE, in the NSC, in the legacy program that are trying to do the right thing. When you have these people that have a huge social media mechanism to go and throw these people under the bus, it is the most un-American thing that one can possibly do, is to do everything that they can to try and destroy the reputations of people like David Grush, of people like Lue Elizondo, of these other whistleblowers. Because at the end of the day, that messaging you are seeing on social media from people like Stephen Greenstreet and the New York Post and others, the goal is to destroy these people. That is what they are trying to do. Because if they can successfully destroy the reputations of these folks, then it makes all of this go away. It makes Congress stop asking questions. When you've got the former director of AARO, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, who again, as I was told by multiple sources, was read into the UAP, a good portion of the UAP legacy program, and is not being truthful, apparently, when he publicly speaks about this. When you've got that guy out there throwing people like David Grush under the bus, when you've got him calling Representative Anna Polina crazy and all of the folks that she's put together a bunch of lunatics, and this guy is still working on our tax dollar? This guy who probably has a Q clearance working at DOE? You tell me why the hell he is still on our payroll. You tell me why this guy still has his clearance. You tell me why Tim Phillips still has his clearance with things that he has supposedly spilled the beans on regarding classified programs in these podcasts. It's disgusting. It's un-American. But this is the machine. This machine wants to shape what you think, what you do, and who you talk to about this particular topic. And finally, I'll say this. The final goal, in my opinion, of this comms plan is to do everything to derail Congress from asking questions about interference of UAP with both our strategic nuclear deterrent and our tactical nuclear weaponry. The folks at the Pentagon and the CIA, they do not want lawmakers asking why UAP continue to tamper with our strategic nuclear deterrent. They do not want members of Congress to ask about UAP, USOs tampering with the Trident nuclear-tipped sea-launched ballistic missile platforms. Some of these missiles, I think, carry up to 10 nuclear warheads. And we know from past incursions dealing with the Minuteman land-based ICBM, not only have these missiles been disabled, there have been instances of their war plans in the missiles and the reentry vehicle buses being retargeted or scrambled. And I guarantee you that is happening on our Ohio-class submarines on the Trident II sea-launched ballistic missile carrying up to 10 or so multiple independently retargetable reentry vehicles, nuclear warheads. They do not want Congress to be asking about that. There is no greater threat to national security of the United States when you upset, when you degrade nuclear force readiness. Nuclear balance is predicated on the other side knowing that if they were to launch a first strike, that the reserve force that the other country has is intact and has the capability of inflicting unacceptable damage in a retaliatory strike. When a country thinks that your reserve force is degraded, well, that's dangerous. And not to mention the cases of these things being spun up, ready for launch in both Russia and here in the United States. This is not history. This continues to happen today. And this is exactly why the Senate needs to be holding hearings about this kind of thing. This is exactly why the Senate needs to find out the right people to haul in and ask who is involved with this communication strategy, this comms plan to derail to derail the FBI, to derail Congress asking about UAP, to derail Congress asking about our strategic nuclear equities being tampered, retargeted, or degraded. And the other thing I will say too, and you're seeing this right now, the issue of these quote-unquote drones. A great many of these from multiple sources have told me that these are UAP using signature management. They are trying to appear as something prosaic. The Pentagon, in their messaging, is essentially saying that this is all new, that they are trying to get to the bottom of it. And they are asking for the public's help. But here's the reality. This has been going on at least since 2019, when hundreds upon hundreds of these things swarmed the Midwest. I have interviewed multiple law enforcement officials who saw these quote-unquote drones, and without exception, they all felt that these vehicles were of non-human origin. Some of them as large as pickup trucks. And we are seeing the exact same thing happen in Europe right now. As a matter of fact, I think it was Switzerland that attempted to shoot down one of these things, and apparently nothing was recovered. So then you have to ask yourself, and part of what you're hearing too is you have early on heard from some of these European governments blaming this on Russia. Well, guess what, folks? This may not be Russia. This may be from out there. So you have to ask yourself, is the United States government, the Department of War, sharing what they know about these drones that have been invading our airspace since 2019? Are they sharing with their partners across the Atlantic what they know about this? My guess is no. Simply judging by some of the public statements. And you tell me how that does not degrade our national security. When you've got all of this kind of willy-nilly stuff going out, when you've got the Pentagon going on the podium and saying, we don't, we're trying to find out what these things are too. That's bullshit. They're lying to you. More so, the Pentagon and the CIA are lying to members of Congress in both the Senate and the House. They are willfully doing this. They are willfully, illegally circumventing Congress. And I'm going to say this. This is something probably most of you are not aware of. This regards the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office under the purview of John Kozlowski. When AARO, and I'll say this, I hope there are members of Congress watching this right now, and I hope all of you watching this right now, call your lawmaker. Send them a clip of this episode, and I want you to ask your lawmaker this. Why is the Pentagon organization, AARO, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, under the Pentagon, who is charged with getting to the bottom of this, whose previous leadership has done everything in their comms power to disparage members of Congress, whistleblowers, to say that there is nothing here. Ask your member of Congress why AARO is offering organizations money, and I'm talking 5 to 6 figures, why the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office is going to scientific organizations offering money for them to partner with them. I want all of you to think about that right now. The very organization in the Pentagon whose leadership has been front and center in sowing disinformation to the American public and to lawmakers. Why are they offering to spend large sums of money to partner with scientific organizations such that they get access to the data that they are collecting? Why is the leadership of AARO going to individuals that are conducting good scientific research and offering them large sums of money? Why? Members of Congress, right now, you need to be asking Pentagon leadership and John Kozlowski why they are going to all of these different people and organizations and offering them large sums of money to collaborate with AARO. Why are they doing this? Why would the organization in the Pentagon, whose previous leader, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, said that they had access to all compartments, they had access to all sensor data, why would they now be going to individuals and organizations offering them large sums of money? Why? What is the reason? What is the purpose? Are they wanting to collaborate? Are they wanting to do something? Maybe we'll just say a little more not good. Let's say that did my live stream just get cut? May have. I'm not sure. I can't tell yet. Anyway, it just popped up. Okay, I'm back. But you have to ask your question, this organization whose leadership has said they have had access to all compartments, all sensor information, why do they need to go to these organizations and these individual scientists and ask them for access to their data? Why? I'll tell you why. This is my personal opinion. They want to know what kind of progress. This is basically what's called an OSINT operation or open source intelligence operation. AARO wants to know what kind of progress these scientific organizations are making in terms of sensor technology, in terms of sensor fusion technology, in terms of what they are able to determine. They want to know, the Pentagon wants to know what these organizations are seeing in the skies. They want to know what sensor technology breakthrough they have made in order to see UAP. In my opinion, that is exactly why they are trying to honeypot these folks. Now, I can tell you in my discussions with some of these folks that they have flat out turned AARO down. They saw a conflict of interest. Because at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself if AARO, which in my opinion is a flypaper operation, at least the overall mission of it is, and I know there are good people in AARO trying to do the right thing, but when you've got an organization that is going to scientific organizations and people, individuals that are spending their hard-earned money to deploy sensor platforms and collect signature data, optical data, et cetera, on these things. Why is AARO doing that? Because they want to know what kind of progress these folks are making. Then the other question you have to ask, now what I have not seen is what exactly the agreements, the sort of agreements offered up were. Are they wanting access to this raw data? Are they wanting to do what we know NASA does, which is essentially take raw data and doctor it, essentially clean it up so that you don't see UAP on certain feeds? Is AARO wanting to collaborate, quote unquote, collaborate with these organizations such that they can find some ways of manipulating that raw data? Is AARO, the Pentagon's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which our taxpayer dollars are spending millions of dollars, are they essentially wanting to control what the final scientific result is? Are they wanting to get in there and find ways of cooking the books, of cooking the data? Is that what they're doing? Members of Congress, you need to ask about this now because tens of millions of dollars are being spent on AARO. And you need to ask, why the hell are they going to all of these organizations and offering up to 6 figures in our tax dollars? You need to ask them exactly why they are doing that. What is the mission? It probably sits in its own sap. I guarantee it. But this organization that has access to all compartments wants to go to mom and pop scientists and organizations and get in bed with them and get them hooked on the money. And guess what? When somebody gives you a lot of money, they may say there are no strings attached, but I guarantee it there are. There are going to be expectations at the end of the day. You cannot trust AARO. You cannot trust the Pentagon. You cannot trust the CIA. You cannot trust the Department of Energy, which, oh, by the way, there is a ton of stuff hidden in the DOE. The DOE is one of the primary methods of obfuscation of multiple SAPs and CAPs. That is where a lot of this stuff is hidden, and the layers upon layers of mechanisms to hide this stuff from Congress. But all of you that are serving this country on Capitol Hill, men and women serving in the Senate and the House of Representatives, and even Elon Musk with his Doge, need to ask, why are we spending tens of millions of dollars on the Pentagon's AARO program, who supposedly has access to all manner of highly classified sensor platforms that apparently have access to all manner of compartments? Why are they spending your and my taxpayer dollars to go and try and buy off these organizations? It stinks to high heaven. And I can tell you right now, I think that if anybody should be defunded, it should be AARO. And Pentagon leadership that is engaged in this should be absolutely ashamed of themselves that they are trying to work the system, that they are trying to corrupt people, that they are trying to get in bed with these scientific organizations, these men and women, like all of us at home, that are spending their hard-earned cash to try and figure this stuff out. It is a no greater slap in the face to these organizations, an insult to these organizations of scientists and individual scientists and engineers that are spending their own money, their own time to develop their own sensor tech, their own sensor fusion tech, their own analyses, their own various procedures to expose what is above our skies right now. There is nothing good about this. Absolutely none. And when you step back and you go on the internet, you go on YouTube and you look up Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, you look up Tim Phillips of AARO, and you go and you listen to everything they've said in hearings, on podcasts, on LinkedIn, there is no other conclusion in my mind then AARO is a sham that deserves to be defunded, that is up to no good, that is doing the bidding of the legacy program, that is doing the bidding of the intelligence community. One of the things that I submitted to Congress in the hearing before last was a letter that is now part of congressional record, where I outed one of the legacy program gatekeepers, a guy by the name of Glenn Gaffney, who was head of the Directorate of Science and Technology, DS&T on the CIA. Myself, Christopher Sharp, and Josh Boswell wrote an extensive bombshell article in the Daily Mail, I think it was about 2 years ago, detailing exactly how the legacy program, UAP crash retrieval program, was run out of the CIA under what's called the Office of Global Access, under the Directorate of Science and Technology. This individual, and I don't know if this is still the case, Sean Kirkpatrick, had a secret panel, a secret advisory board on AARO. I exposed that secret panel on the Good Trouble Show a couple years back, and lawmakers heard about the news that I revealed, that this panel existed. So what did lawmakers do? They went to AARO, they went to Sean Kirkpatrick and said, we want to know who is sitting on this secret advisory board. And would AARO cough up the data? No. So when I find out that Glenn Gaffney, one of the main legacy gatekeepers of the legacy program, the program that has taken people out, destroyed lives, harassed journalists. I've been a victim of that. When that legacy program, when you've got one of the main guys who is sitting at the head of DS&T and Office of Global Access, this organization that has been responsible for retaliation against members of our military, whistleblowers, when you've got that same guy sitting on this advisory board that Sean Kirkpatrick put together, the very organization that is supposed to be the safe place for whistleblowers to go and make a protected disclosure, when you've got on this advisory board the very organization, the head of the very organization that has been retaliating against those same people, that's a problem. When you've got AARO telling all of these whistleblowers, come to us. You have a place you can make a protected disclosure. You will be exempt from your national security non-disclosure agreement. And you've got people coming into AARO, and then you find out that one of the guys on the advisory board works for the CIA and is part of, apparently, the legacy crash retrieval program, this horde of 50-ish or so senior executive service people that have done things like, likely done things such as retaliate against whistleblowers or put David Grush or Lue Elizondo on hit lists. And this guy is sitting on the AARO advisory board? You gotta be kidding me. Now, luckily, this letter made it into Congress. It is a part of the congressional record. Now, I have no, I have no idea if Glenn Gaffney still sits on it, but what this does is this speaks to the cancerous level of corruption within the Pentagon and the CIA, and in turn, what is likely happening at AARO. Whistleblowers, if you are thinking about testifying to AARO, don't do it. Do not do it. Because I guarantee you, if there are people like that are affiliated with the legacy program that are sitting on this advisory board, you can take this to the bank that your name is getting back channeled into the legacy program. You can take it to the bank that when you are making a protected disclosure to AARO, your protected disclosure, the information that you are disclosing, what you know about the SAPs and CAPs that you were involved with, you can guarantee you everything that you are disclosing to AARO is making it back into the legacy program. It is getting back channeled. You cannot trust AARO. You cannot trust a Pentagon organization who is spending apparently up to 6 figures. Pardon me, my throat's getting a bit dry here. 6 figures trying to create partnerships with people that are developing homemade technology to detect this stuff. You cannot trust AARO when its former leadership is out there messaging, counter-messaging, attacking members of Congress, attacking whistleblowers, throwing up disinformation. Why should any of you on Capitol Hill trust anything that AARO is doing? There are good people there, but at the end of the day, John Kozlowski, who I have heard great things about, these folks, these are career government folks that will do what they are told by the people up the chain. That is their job to do that. The people, the debunkers that run these organizations, these debunking organizations, or are tweeting or whatnot. Disinformation is a job. It's a career. On the Weaponized podcast, you heard James Lukatsky talk about that. And he specifically said, in his view, that it definitely appeared that AARO was a disinformation operation. I don't think he said it in exactly those words, but it was either a counterintelligence or whatnot. But why should Congress continue to fund an organization that is, just by its history, blatantly lying to Congress and to the American people? Why are we, who can barely put food on the goddamn table, spending tens of millions of dollars on AARO to go and lie to us? Why are we spending all of this taxpayer dollars when we can barely pay our rent and barely pay our mortgages and barely afford to put clothes on the back of our kids? You tell me why we are paying that kind of money to AARO, and why AARO sees fit to go and try and spend six figures in 5 to 6 figures up on these organizations. Because I guarantee you, if they're going to do it, there's nothing good is going to be will come out of that. And if we look at the track record of AARO blatantly lying to the American public, blatantly lying to Congress, why are we still paying for this? It is a slap in the face to every member of Congress. It is a slap in the face to Representative Anna Paulina Luna. It is a slap in the face to Representative Tim Burchett, Senator Gillibrand, all of these different people that have spent extraordinary amounts of political capital to try and fix this issue. It's an insult what AARO is doing. It is an absolute insult. It is un-American. And there is no one thing more un-American than these folks, these quote-unquote journalists and debunkers, doing everything they can to destroy the reputation of not only this film, the filmmaker Dan Farah, Lue Elizondo, David Grush, Jay Stratton. There is nothing more un-American than this whole op on the internet and elsewhere to try and destroy the lives of these people. It is wrong. It is absolutely wrong. And it's up to all of us at home to call it out. Call it like it is. When you've got these folks saying extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, you need to really take a look at their accounts and what they've been up to. When it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what journalists at the New York Post are doing. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to see when what Ken Klippenstein is doing when he puts out an article that are fed to him by CIA intelligence operatives on what is going on with David Grush's own personal mental and physical health. These people are up to no good. And AARO, I can't say that I think anything is going to come good out of that organization. And in my view, Congress should defund it and find another mechanism that will not be under the influence of the CIA, the Pentagon, the DOE, and the legacy program. They need to find another way to form a body that is independent of the Pentagon and these organizations, because you cannot trust the Pentagon. You cannot trust the CIA. And here's the final thing I'm going to say. I know I've said this a couple of times, but this is it. This is my message to President Trump. President Trump, we may not agree on most things politically. I actually worked for you on The Celebrity Apprentice. We have interacted in a certain way. There's one thing I know about you, President Trump. You understand what it means to be a trailblazer. You understand showmanship. You are someone that I may not agree with, but I will hand it to you. You have been fearless in many things that you have done. There is no better opportunity, President Trump, for you to go down in American history than to declassify the special access programs that are sitting under the National Security Council. You have that ability. You've been read into those SAPs. You've been likely read into the PEDs. You have that ability. You have the legal wherewithal to declassify that tomorrow. President Trump, there will be no other television or media event in the history of the nation or in the future of this nation that will ever top you going in front of the podium, in front of the nation, in front of the world, and saying that we are not alone, that we have been interacted with by non-human intelligence for a very long time, that we have craft. You, Mr. President, will go down in history, and I guarantee you, no one will ever top that. You can be that person. You have the people on your national security staff that know all of this. They've all been fully read in, that are there to support you. You can, sir, go down in history and right this wrong, rip this Band-Aid off, pull these rotting vegetables that have been sitting in the refrigerator for over 80 years. You, President Trump, have the sole ability to fix this. It's likely not going to be Congress, but you can do it. You can do it. Marco Rubio, as head of the National Security Council, he can make that happen for you, sir. And it's time you do it. Folks, call your Congress. And if you're MAGA, you're one of my MAGA friends, call the administration and say, look, President Trump, you promised to be transparent on the UAP issue. It's time for the rubber to meet the road and do the right thing for the nation and take the lead on this before China or Russia does it. Folks, thanks for sticking around. Again, we really appreciate the super chats. This is literally a one-man show, and we don't have sponsors or anything like that. We make revenue off of the Google ads and a couple $100 off of Patreon, but that's it. So your donation helps me bring you information like this, and I very much appreciate that, and very much appreciate Lue Elizondo coming on this show, and appreciate all of you at home doing what you're doing and standing up for what is right and standing up for the Constitution of the United States. Tell your friends, tell your family to watch The Age of Disclosure by Dan Farah. There is no better movie out there that unwinds this sort of ball of yarn that needs to be taken care of. Thanks for joining us. And we have some really, really great interviews that are going to be coming up that we will be announcing soon. Follow us on Twitter at Good Trouble Show and everywhere else at The Good Trouble Show. And in the YouTube description, if you wish to support us on Patreon, our link is there. And then you can also find our podcast version of the show on all of your favorite podcasting platforms. Anyway, thanks to everyone sticking this out, listening. Call your congressman, watch the movie, tell your friends about the movie, tell your friends about our show. Let's get the word out. Let's get this fixed. Let's finally have some justice.